Welcome to this demonstration of how to paint seagulls in Pastel. Today I'm using a free reference photo from Facebook by Vanessa Mullins, Holland, of these two seagulls in the Shoreline. I am using a UArt sanded paper for this painting, so I begin the process by blocking in the darker values of the water in the background of the seagulls. I'm going to finish blocking in the color around the seagulls, and then I will use an alcohol wash to blend and dissolve the pastel colors that I've laid down on the surface of the paper. An alcohol wash provides a solid base for applying my soft pastels over. By having a base layer, some of the grain of the paper is filled in a little bit, so when I apply soft pastels to the surface, it will blend more smoothly. So this is now my base layer, which actually becomes my guide for applying my pastel colors over. When painting the sea and water, it's a good idea to leave some color showing through. An underpainting does this very nicely because the colors leave a solid base and won't mix with the new layers you add on top. Also, the UArt paper I'm using accepts water or the alcohol wash very nicely and doesn't warp my paper. So it's important that you choose the right pastel paper in order to do an underpainting technique. Also, I like using an alcohol, just a rubbing alcohol, either 70%, 90%, doesn't matter, to dissolve my pastels because it dries very quickly. So I usually don't use water, but you still could use water if you don't have alcohol, but you'd be very pleased, I think, using the alcohol. So now I'm focusing on the light movement and ripples occurring in the water. I'm trying to follow my reference photo more closely, especially in the forefront where the ripples are. In the background, I'll add some light little wave action that may not appear in the reference photo, but I think it'll add a little more interest to the painting. When I draw ripples in the water, I start with the darker blue to shape the shadows occurring in the ripples, and then I add a light blue to the outer surface of the ripples to create some highlights reflecting on the water. So now I want to clean the edges of my seagulls using an eraser. The excess pastel erases very easily, so I can begin shaping the outline of my seagulls. I'm using a dark blue to outline my birds because it will blend well with the blue background in the water and the blue-gray feathers in the bird's body. At this point, I can start drawing in some of the darker values and outlines within the bird and shape the eye and beak on the bird's head. Once I have my outlines placed, then I can gradually start adding some layers of color and blend it into the grain of the paper and continue adding layers on top of layers to build my colors, my midtones, and lighter shades. So now I will zoom in a little bit so that you can follow along a little more closely as I develop the details of the seagulls. I'm adding a light gray to the body of the bird first before applying darker shades of gray or color to the body. That way the colors will blend very softly together. It's important not to use white as your base layer. You want to use shades of gray so you can gradually build white on top of it. Next, I will draw the dark feathers in the bird's wings. I'm using a very dark blue, almost a navy blue, for the darkest areas in the bird's feathers. I will continue to use 2 or 3 shades of blue to define the feathers and gradually add shades of gray to the body of the bird to give it dimension and fullness. Here I'm going to finish the details in the seagull's beaks. They have an interesting black band around their beak, and I do believe they're called a ring-billed gulls. And they also have a red ring around their eyes. I'm going to move on to this seagull, and I think I will zoom in very close so that you can follow along as I build the layers and details of the seagull. I will be using 2 or 3 shades of gray to build the bird's feathers, and I will use white as the highlights in the bird's feathers. I still need to finish the reflections of the birds at the water's edge. So I will finish the reflections of the seagull's legs up to the edge of the shoreline with some colorful rusty orange to give the shoreline a little bit more color. I'm making my lines a little bit wavy to indicate the movement of the shoreline water. I'm following my reference photo more closely to capture the details in the shadow being cast from the seagull's body. I can also see a dark reflection in the water coming from the bird's tail and darker wing areas. At this point, I'm going to start adding the final details to the painting. I'll be adding the final highlights to the bird's feathers and some shimmering light to the water's edge. Now that the foreground water is done, I will move on to the background water. The background water will have a softer movement to the surface, so I'll try to simplify the process by adding a slightly lighter color of blue tone to the water by adding small shapes to indicate the movement of the water. It's important that these small swirls that I'm making are still flowing in the same direction of the small waves in the picture. Now I will blend them very lightly and add the final layer of white to the very points of the waves to give that reflection of light in the water. I hope you have enjoyed this video. I upload videos regularly, so please subscribe to watch future lessons and demos in Pastel. Thank you.